Lovely. Thanks very much for inviting me today. I'm Tom Curtis. I'm partner at Three Keel, and I'm going to talk about Lens, which is the Landscape Enterprise Network's approach, which is something that we've developed with Andy Griffiths at Nestlé and with a range of other partners in Lens Landscapes now across the whole of the UK. Lens, in essence, is a process which works regionally to create and coordinate new markets for landscape outcomes, for ecosystem services, including, but going beyond that thing that came out in the center of that Slido screen, food. Food's critical, and the other functions and services that land provide are additional, but also a bolster to the production of food. So it's the way we see it, and the reason we developed it is we see it as an opportunity for regional businesses and society to procure and have an influence on the outcomes and quality and functionality of the landscapes in which they operate. But it's also an opportunity for land managers as well to develop new markets, new customers, new outcomes from land, in addition to their primary functions of producing food. Which I think, as we go into the future, is additional opportunity, but also a good hedge against some of the risks associated with land management businesses and the uncertainty that we face. So what I'm going to cover in this talk is essentially a sort of Lens 101. First of all, what I'd like to do is talk about the principles and where Lens first came from, the Landscape Enterprise Networks, where that came from as an idea and why we developed it. Then I'm going to go through the basic process that we use for developing a Lens project or landscape or program in a region. And then I'll run through, if I've got time, a couple of examples of where we've been implementing Lens. So hopefully the slides work. So essentially, Lens came out of a conversation that we had with Nestlé, with Andy Griffiths, who's sort of co-conspirator on Lens, about 3 years ago. Essentially, at Three Keel, we've been doing some work with Nestlé on sustainability risk management more generally for their business, and Andy was saying, well, you know, be interested in looking at that in an actual particular location. Very often, when we look at sustainability risk, we look at the risks that are incoming to a business. So how will deforestation or soil loss or human rights issues affect them as a business? And Andy's question to us was, well, could you apply the same thing to our factory, actually a factory in Cumbria, at a place called Dalston? Could we apply that to risks that come from sustainability issues that arise from the environment, from the landscape in which that factory sits, from northern Cumbria, essentially? And systematically start to understand what it is about that landscape that matters to Nestlé, and therefore where there is a business case for Nestlé to invest in and take care of that landscape. And so, yeah, so we said, okay, fine, we'll do that. And what became very clear very quickly were, well, a few things about Nestlé's interest in that landscape, and then a few realizations about how we tended to look at landscapes and how perhaps if we did it differently, we might be able to build stronger business cases to get commercial organizations and society more generally to invest in sustainable landscapes. So from Nestlé's perspective, it looks at northern Cumbria, and it looks at a landscape which it doesn't own, but it's got assets in it that produce the milk that it requires for this factory just north of Carlisle in Dalston. It gets all of its milk from within 50 kilometres of that factory. So absolutely critical part of the production cycle. It's also dependent on that landscape because that landscape is the place through which its commodities go in and out. Logistics are critical, and if and when things flood in that landscape, as they do, that's a problem in terms of Nestlé's operation at Dalston. It's a problem in terms of stuff getting in and out, product coming in, product going out, staff getting in and out, and also that landscape, the quality of that landscape, the functionality of that landscape is critical from the perspective of Nestlé's employees as well, and their ability to live securely and raise families in that landscape, and therefore continue to be able to work for Nestlé. These are all business critical reasons why the functioning and quality and performance of that landscape matter to Nestlé. Now, the importance of that is that that gives Nestlé a strong and targeted business focus and reason for investing in aspects of landscape sustainability in Northern Cumbria. And we can start to therefore build up a business case for Nestlé to invest in that landscape. And that's the first key tenet of Lens, is that we start to look at the landscape from the perspective of demand. We start to understand a landscape and the quality and performance of a landscape from the perspective of the organisations that we were going to try and engage as customers of that landscape to pay for outcomes from that landscape. And that's very different from the way that we're used to thinking as perhaps land managers or conservationists, or about landscapes where we think first of the landscape and how it should be and then try and sell it to people. It's much more of a business-led, customer-focused approach. The second key tenet of Lens is based on co-investment. Very rapidly, we could spot that Nestlé wasn't the only organisation that was interested in river systems and soils in that landscape. Other organisations are interested in flood risk. Other organisations are interested in the same things in that landscape, the same assets in that landscape, but for different reasons. And so, for example, we could engage United Utilities, the water company, because to share an interest with Nestlé in, for example, soil management, not because United Utilities is producing milk, but because United Utilities is interested in phosphorus management, nutrient management in that landscape, and therefore they had a common cause in terms of paying for or a common interest and a common cause in looking after those assets, or paying for those assets to be looked after. And in fact, that forms the basis of our first Lens co-trade. So the second key component or tenet of Lens is that it's demand-led, but it's also based on finding out where there are overlapping interests in the landscape and opportunities for co-investment. And clearly what that does is it means that Nestlé or United Utilities aren't carrying the can for that whole landscape, which is great for them. Means that they're more likely and less exposed if they invest in that landscape. It also increases the size of the pot, straightforwardly. It gives us more budget to go at, to move the needle on getting something to happen in that landscape and getting it to be effective. And it starts to build up a more sophisticated set of needs from that landscape that can be then delivered against, building general landscape sustainability. So those are the key tenets of Lens. And those are the principles we'd spotted early on when Andy and I were looking at this as two organisations. So we thought, well, what should we do with this? We'll develop it into a process. And we thought we'd develop it into a process by actually doing it. So we've developed a Lens process based on these principles, these tenets, in a range of different landscapes across the UK. And over the last 3 years, we've developed active Lens landscapes where we're putting together essentially trades which have more than one demand side interest on one side and a range of different suppliers against those services on the other, in landscapes across the UK, in southwest Scotland, in Cumbria, where this all started, in Yorkshire and Greater Manchester, so an urban type landscape. This has been developed first in a rural landscape. No reason at all why it can't be done in urban landscapes. It's about building consortia of business interests and helping them to procure outcomes from landscape. That can absolutely be within an urban and peri-urban landscape. We're working now in Derbyshire and Northamptonshire, on the Bristol Froome, another urban rural interface landscape, and on the Hampshire Avon. Hampshire Avon, along with Cumbria, is one of the more developed landscapes. And each of these with a range of different partners on the demand and the supply end of this, from a range of different sectors. And out of that experience, we've essentially developed a 3-step process for where we implement Lens, and it kind of shakes out into these 3 stages. And the first of those stages is essentially an opportunity analysis. We're interested in understanding where's the opportunity to develop these sorts of Lens transaction chains, which pull together multiple interests on one side and help them to procure outcomes from land managers on the supply side. Where are the opportunities? And essentially what we do this with this is we break it down to a systematic look at landscape beneficiaries, landscape functions, and landscape assets. So the beneficiaries is essentially an analysis of where's the money in a regional landscape, and what are the sectors that make up that of the economy within a region, and of those sectors, who has a stake, who has an interest in, who's got vested interest essentially in the performance and quality of the landscape. And what we rapidly see is that, yes, that includes agri-food businesses, but it goes well beyond that, to tech businesses, to developers, to utilities, to a range of different sectors who might not be primarily about land, but might have a lot of stake in land and how it performs. And what we do is we trace back, we think back, well, okay, well, what functions do they require? What are the range of functions they require? And what are the assets in that landscape that underpin that? What's the soils, the river systems, the habitats, the public access infrastructure that underpins the functions they require? And those functions can be anything from resilient food supply through air quality, flood risk management, nutrient management, recreation resources, placemaking, habitat offsetting, range of different things. And essentially what we're doing in this analysis is we're trying to see where there's an overlap in different organizations and sectors showing interest in the same functions, or even just in the same assets that underpin those functions, because it's in those overlaps that we find opportunities to create collaborative investment. Essentially, shared interest enables people to work together in consortia to procure outcomes more efficiently, more effectively, and with more budget. And that's what we're looking at. And obviously what this throws up is multiple opportunities, and our opportunity, and the way we play it with Lens is not to go for them all at once, not to try and boil this ocean, but actually to get in there and bite off one really, promising looking collaborative opportunity, whereas 2 or 3 or 4 organizations have a shared interest in an asset in the landscape, and we reckon we can do something about it. And when we've got that opportunity spotted, we then go on to the second stage, which is to build a basic operating unit for Lens, and that's a value chain which essentially has demand at one end and supply at the other. So essentially, to do this, and this is the basic operating unit, this is a core part of Lens. We pull together business needs. We understand those business needs, and where they overlap, we draw them together in this box marked demand aggregator, and we convene business around their common interests. And by understanding their common interests and understanding their interests, we can start to build a specification for services, ultimately a technical understanding of what those businesses' common requirements are for the landscape. And that gives us a specification for services that we can go out then to groups of land managers to ask them, well, what can you do for us that delivers against that? And we tend to deal with clusters or groups of farmers brought together by various types of organisations to put together those supply propositions, essentially on behalf of ranges of farmers. We're very interested in that supply aggregation because most of the services emerge at a landscape scale within Lens contexts. Also, it helps from a farmer's perspective. It helps give them the capacity, technical capacity, to engage with and transact in an equitable manner with our supply side, essentially. And there's a bit of back and forth there that goes on between the supply aggregator and what they're proposing and the proposition for services, or the specification for services. And when we've got the right specification for works, then we go on to cut a deal, basically, to contract those services. And essentially, the price point for that is somewhere less than it's worth to the people on the demand side and more than it costs for the people on the supply side to deliver it. That's where the money's on the table, and it's somewhere in there that both parties can benefit. So that's the second phase of Lens, essentially building the first value chain. And beyond that, we build multiple value chains. We bank that value chain, we transact it, we get it working, and we augment it, and then we can deliver other different functions from the landscape, different commonalities of interest around different assets, and build up a network of trades, essentially, for a range of different services. And for a range of different clients and sectors. And that, of course, on the demand side, we've built this around commercial interests, but there's no reason at all why public sector interests couldn't be procuring into this as well, to share costs and to co-procure, essentially, in a similar way and through a similar mechanism, providing a more simple market to play into from the supply end at the land end of this. I'm aware that I'm running short on time, so those are the key 3 steps within the Lens process. That's opportunity mapping, building the first value chain, and then building that into a network of trades. And essentially, as I'll flick through the remaining slides. So within Lens, as you start to get that complexity of multiple trades, you need governance, something we're absolutely working on. We're working on a range of different landscapes, from rural, as in the example in Cumbria, through to more urban ones, for example, the Bristol Froome, where we're very active at the moment, looking at urban greenways and co-funding for those. And so essentially, in summary, Lens is something which from the demand side builds interest based on business needs, and it creates partnerships and it breaks down silos between different sectors to help them co-procure. From the supply side, it frames the environment as a market opportunity, not income foregone. It encourages the supply side to club together, giving more capacity and getting them better deals, essentially, and that's better for everyone, more stable. And overall, it harnesses demand for landscape performance beyond agri-food. Agri-food is critical, it's central to society's survival, but land can do other things as well, which complement and bolster that core function. It's responsive to regional conditions and interests, that's really critical. It's rooted locally, governed locally, managed locally. These are regional trading relationships, and it manages complexity. We're not trying to boil the ocean all at once, we build this incrementally over time. And I will stop there because I've had 16 minutes. So thank you very much.